but
Okay. First item concerns a realization I had a few days ago. Something that's been building in me for a long time. Here's Patrick. I've been thinking about the nature, about the fundamental difference between the deep architecture of Morte D'Arthur as opposed to the deep architecture of the traditional interactive fiction piece. And that, hi, Patrick.
hey,
And so there's something fundamental here, a difference between them. And I finally started to nail it down. I still don't have it perfect. It's not. I'm not really there yet, but I at least wanted to present my preliminary ideas on the problem. Basically, the difference between them is the difference between, we could say it's the difference between trees and lines. Interactive fiction uses trees. Morte D'Arthur is essentially linear. We could talk about branching versus global variables. Morte D'Arthur is primarily based on its global variables, and interactive fiction, the primary activity involves navigating these trees. And in fact, but they both have elements of the other. That is, Morte D'Arthur does have some branching. In fact, it has one rather large tree. And every piece of interactive fiction does have a little bit of global variables, and some have even more. So there's definitely, these are not opposites or, two ends of a polarization. They are instead two fundamental elements. They're vaguely analogous to the concept of process versus data or object. But I wouldn't push that analogy too hard. However, it is definitely there. That is, using global variables requires more mathematics, and branching is pretty simple and obvious. And that leads me to the sad conclusion that I don't think we'll ever see the proper merging of these two concepts. That is, I'm pretty sure interactive fiction is going to pretty much stick the way it is, with lots of trees and an occasional little Boolean global variable. I can't really take it much further than that. I had one other little item I wanted to mention about it. I will mention my classic example that I've used for decades now is PacMan, because PacMan is basically a branching tree structure of directional decisions combined with a set of global variables involving what dots have been eaten yet. And it's a beautiful balance between the two. And it is that balance that makes it a successful game design. So I don't know. I think that there is something really important in the idea that what we need is, for interactive storytelling, is a system with some branching in it and some global variables in the right balance, where Morte D'Arthur is way over on the global variables end and interactive fiction is way over in the branching end. And how can we approach the center? And I don't know what to recommend there. Second item, rather sad item. I was talking with Kathy, my wife, about about my hopes for the new encounter editor that will be in JavaScript and on the web and available to any and all, and how I had high hopes for it. And she interrupted me and said, Chris, your first effort in this general direction was the Erasmatron in 1996. How many people used the Erasmatron other than Laura Mixon, whom you were paying? And I said, well, nobody. She said, and then around 2002, you made a second generation Erasmatron with important new features and somewhat cleaned up. And how many people use that? And I said, well, nobody. And then in 2008, you came up with the idea for Storytron. You completely redesigned it, everything very different. And after it took you years and you spent a lot of money. And how many people ever use that? And I said, well, nobody. And then when you were working on C-Boot, you built the first encounter editor and you made all these videos explaining how it works. And it was a really clean, neat design. And you announced it to the world. And how many people used it? Nobody. So now here I am again, coming up with a great new idea. I'm going to get lots of people interested in it and using it. What are your chances of success? And I had to admit, no, this is probably not going to go anywhere. And so I've concluded that I really just need to set aside this attempt to recruit a new cadre of people using writers. It's just not bloody likely. And so instead, I'm returning to an area that I was always very good at. I'm finally doing a JavaScript version of Balance of the Planet, my environmental simulation, which is really needed now and is more likely to be actually used for something. So I've been working on that, and I will continue that. I figure it'll be done by November, at which point I will reconsider the JavaScript encounter editor, but I don't know. So that's
played with ChatGPT to rework code.
I don't.
Well, it'll speed your process up dramatically. I assure you. Especially for this kind of task.
The problem I face is that ChatGPT really, it's another programming language, in effect, a much more productive programming language.
It turns you more into a project manager than a programmer. And you're already your own project manager.
Well,
skills, yeah.
What is the learning curve? How many hours do you guys think it would take me to get ChatGPT to the point where I'm generating useful JavaScript?
If you post a bunch of code that is of a language, what's the baseline language that you're using?
The original was Java. Lots of Java.
Post a bunch of Java code. I always say please, because you never know if there's going to be a technological singularity and they're going to go over every time you didn't say please and kill everybody who was rude and spare the ones who were nice. So I say, please translate this into JavaScript, and it'll absolutely, I'll do that right now. And in about 15 seconds, you'll have a bunch of JavaScript, and you try to run it, and you get an error, and you say, hey, I got this console error. Running that code, what's up with that? And they say, well, sorry, pardon me, how about this? And then you get it to run, and you say, okay, but now I'm getting an API or whatever. And so that I don't know what to do there. That might be an API problem. You should consult the docs. At some point there's a limit, but it's very helpful. It's very helpful for translating. I had to confront. So I mentioned before that I spent basically almost the last 10 years. So I'm like, I've really taken after you, Chris. And just tirelessly, and I raised some funding, and then I lost the team, and then COVID happened. I raised some funding before that, and I could keep going. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do the C++ myself. And then in June, I was like, okay, I might have to accept that after like $600,000 in 5 years of my life that there's C++ tech debt in the way that our logic interacts with the Bitcoin pro, because it's a huge compile. Like you can't even run it in Visual Studio. And I might just have to accept this, and that I failed. And this is above my pay grade. But I know JavaScript. We could just do RPC calls to Bitcoin Core without any special C++ stuff. Get the raw block data, index everything in JavaScript. JavaScript. 8.5 going through all the project code in C++. It gave me JavaScript. It's not runnable, but it's not easy. But it was okay. I have this. I could probably toggle some of these as libraries. And now I'm going to start tinkering with a prototype. So it's very helpful, to be honest. I think this is a good project, Balance of the Planet, to this unpaid employee. And if you pay them, if you get like a $40 a month sub, you from GPT 3.5 to 4, and 4 is better in ways that are. I also tried GitHub Copilot, where instead like hello language, um, you put and then it'll prototype your functions for you in the IDE. That's a little bit more sophisticated. So pro labs that say that it about doubles their productivity. So, and I think for a trans job, it's maybe a 5x productivity boost because of how laborious and tedious it is.
Craig?
So don't be discouraged. But also on the other hand, I really think that Sasha, it's not like no, I mean, yeah, nobody used it and then made a product that became like a big hit, right? And then created this ripple effect. Yeah. However, you have had plenty of acolytes who have taken after you, and Sasha did build a very nice editor, and it isn't super easy to use. It has a learning curve. But that learning curve, it's not that bad. And my big problem is I can be like, okay, you work on interactive storytelling, and I'll go work on trading the markets to make money. So I'm gonna get around to it. I got a few ones planned. So when time permits.
That's always been the problem, isn't it? Time permitting.
Yeah. Greg, what's your estimate of the amount of time investment before you get productive with ChatGPT 4?
Well, so I've only done a little bit of limited toying around with it before I finally just deleted my account because I could probably spend all day playing with the damn thing. My thought with it is it needs to understand what domain it is that you're working with, and it needs to have examples on the internet of that particular domain. So I'm not sure that interactive storytelling, I mean, because we're a niche of a niche of a niche, I'm not sure that it's going to be as productive. As far as taking existing code and then translating it into something that can be useful. I feel like there's enough out and trying to cajole another. It's like taking on a new employee. Basically, you're cajoling another new employee to try and figure out all this stuff. And I have a feeling that I don't think it's going to be quite as rewarding as for the time investment.
Okay, that's a very good point. Very good. Ajmal, have you?
It works better for languages like JavaScript that are interpreted and that there's a lot of online material that the AI is trained on versus C++. And Java is probably somewhere in between. So it can translate for you very quickly, though, and it can debug your translated code. So as far as what you want to accomplish with redesigning the complex system dynamics of Balance of the Planet as a simulation of ecology and ChatGPT isn't gonna whip that up for you like America, right? But that's where you come in, right? But the groundwork it can get you done real quick.
Ajmal, have you used ChatGPT 4?
I don't have that much experience with using it for generating code. I did ask it a few questions about the current project I'm working on for an interactive story world. It wasn't super useful. It kind of just gave me guidelines of the generic thing of what you would do if you were trying to do a project based on the questions I gave it. I didn't find it super useful. But this was a while ago. Maybe it's improved since then.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I must say, I'm 73 years old, and one of the fundamental laws of programming is that most programmers drop out at an early age. Craig, do you know anybody your age who is still writing code?
So sadly, I mean, I know a number of programmers. They tend to be about 10 years younger than I am. And I know a number of management, which is kind of disconcerting. I know a few people who are still like sole proprietorships in that, or not sole proprietorships, but I mean, they're basically head cook and bottle washer of their own company. So
Yeah.
they still do programming and such, but it becomes vanishingly few, which is unfortunate.
Well, my belief is that coding is what is a mentally intensive effort. It's like juggling balls. And when you're young, you can juggle 20 balls at once and do a good job handling. Hey, very good. And that works. But as you age, your cognitive strengths shift from handling lots of details to seeing the big picture. And for that reason, most people drop out of coding in their 30s and 40s. Certainly, one of the most telling things is to look at photographs of the crowd at the game developers conference, which always seems to be people in their 20s. Year after year after year, it looks like the same age group. Nothing ever changes. So anyway,
I mean, look, it's easier to get VC funding as a 28-year-old than as a 38-year-old, I would say.
Good point. Good point. So I am concerned about my own ability, though, to keep up with changing technology, especially because there's a big time investment in learning the latest whatever it is. Now, I just read yesterday that now Python is the hot language that everybody's using.
Yep.
Oh, here we go. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to learn Python.
Honestly,
I think Python versus JavaScript, it's overrated. You can achieve efficiencies in JavaScript. Yeah, sure, Python will clock better on a lot of heavy algorithms than JavaScript, but that's not really, well, that might be germane to Balance of the Planet. But yeah, I mean, but also like ChatGPT could translate that for you very easily. And I'm telling you, you're overestimating the learning curve here. It really would take you 20 seconds to paste some code in, say, please translate this into another language, and it'll give you something. So
as a Python programmer, as a Python programmer, I will say the one thing that I do not envy anyone trying to do is trying to get Python working on different environments. It is very much at home on a Unix environment. You can get it working in Windows. There's stuff like Anaconda and whatnot, but telling folks the first thing you need to do is install Conda or Anaconda and then figure out a virtual environment. It's like your eyes are going to glaze over at that point.
So.
Yeah, I'm a JavaScript guy. That's what I taught myself. I taught myself how to code properly when I was 29 years old, living in my mother-in-law's house that was under foreclosure, with $30,000 in debt and like no cash, and then I got a job by the end of the year, so worked out. And yeah, so I prepared a presentation. I'd love to jump into that.
Well, let me finish.
You promised me half an hour.
Yeah. We'll at the half hour at 9:30. We'll make that jump.
Cool. Okay.
So anyway, I am going to be setting aside the encounter editor for the time being. Work on Balance of the Planet. There remain that means that I am abandoning for the time, postponing and possibly abandoning the effort to recruit a new class of cadets from the aspiring novelist community. Instead, my current thinking, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is that perhaps the thing to do is to provide more of a support group for people like you who are already motivated and probably just need some help in improving their work. What do you think of the basic idea of
That was what I was looking for to do with the Meetup group, which I'm still working on, noodling around in my head how exactly I'm going to explain to folks who are looking for area Meetup groups in order to join on why this is something that they would want to join and what to expect from that. So that is one approach that I'm thinking of as a recruitment to get the folks that are motivated and interested in this without necessarily think that this is just another interactive fiction group. And again, I'm trying not to paint ourselves in the shadow of what interactive fiction is. It's like, we're not this, because that nobody benefits from that. But more, this is what you can do with this technology. Here are the folks that are working on this. We'd love for you to come and play with us. That's what I'm looking to do with this.
how can I find this Meetup group?
It isn't existing yet. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm looking for
Actually,
how
I find
to
the Discord reasonably active. Sorry.
Well, it's more of a getting folks onto the Discord. So it's more getting more interested folks, because again, are getting up there in years and such. So it's more about getting folks that are interested in playing around with these technologies into knowing that it exists, number one, so that you're not, going through your Barnes and Noble and it's like, oh, I wonder what this interactive storytelling book is that with this guy on the front of it, as I did actually, except I knew who Chris was, but that's beside the point. It's finding the others is the whole idea. It's getting the folks that at least have a kernel of feeling that they're not being served by the current tools and wondering what else is out there. And that's where I'm thinking that this could, at the very least, because it seems there's a lot of folks that are out there on Meetup that are looking for stuff. It's getting this in front of other folks and saying, here is an alternative to the stuff that you are learning in other material. And here's an on-ramp to get onto that. That's where I'm at the moment. Again, I got to come up with the description. I'm going to prioritize that. I'm making my commitment right now, staking my claim,
Well, you're on the right track. I think I've been on the wrong track for decades now. And
no, I wouldn't say that. The thing is, you've had many years of finding out things, and I don't want to discount any of the stuff that you've got, because the stuff that you've got is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's just unfortunately getting folks interested in stuff. And I say this as someone who has always been on the fringes. I mean, I was the guy that bought the 3DO. I was the guy that I had one. I am always the one that picks, the not even the win, place, or show. I mean, it's usually the one picking up the rear. So I totally get that. But on the same token, the more interesting stuff happens in the margins. Yeah. And quite honestly, I find all this stuff absolutely fascinating, and I think others will as well. It's just getting it in front of them, being the person that's able to pick up the 3DO and not busily being overrun by Sony PlayStation saying that was the first CD-ROM console ever made. Documentary.
Okay.
Well, Tesla, he died delirious, in love with pigeons, totally impoverished, and having a lot of his IP kind of robbed by Edison, who made much money off of it. And now everybody recognizes that he's way better than Edison ever was, and a much more moral person. And his namesake is on one of the biggest companies on the planet.
So we want to replicate the same thing, but with less pigeons. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't go off with the pigeons. Yeah.
Okay. Any so the idea I'm going to be exploring is developing really the Discord group into more a greater emphasis on supporting existing efforts, giving people, having people say, it would really help if I could get. I suspect one thing people might want to use or want to have is editorial criticism of their designs. That is, let me download your code and go over it and see if I can understand, whatever weaknesses there are in it. Craig, how do you feel? Will people be a little reluctant to share that?
No, I think there's a lot of folks, I know myself included, are trying to figure out if we're on the right path, not necessarily in a, shape me in your own image type thing, but more of a, am I understanding the play here? I think that's a sticking point for a lot of folks. Based off of the conversations that I've seen in the Discord, that seems to be a fundamental thing, is where folks are trying to understand what exactly is interactive storytelling. We're still, a lot of folks, I think, at the initial steps of how is this different than interactive fiction? How is this different than all the other technologies that are out there? Is Mass Effect 3 interactive storytelling because it has, a very, whatever. Anyways, point being is that I think there is a lot of use for that, and I think a support role would be very helpful.
Okay. I will start thinking along those lines and seeing what I can do at Discord. And it's now 9:30. So I'm going to turn over the floor to Patrick.
Could you activate screen sharing?
Oh, okay. To do that, I have to make you an administrator.
I think you could actually set it just so it does multiple sharing. I think it's part of the tab for screen sharing. You said allow multiple users to share.
Oh, okay.
I think that'll do it without changing hosts.
Yes, there it is. Okay.
Awesome. And please,
I've been learning too much about Zoom
at the end of the hour, because that'll make me a little more anxious as I go. But I am going to try and hit that.
Okay.
All right. The screen. Let's just do the whole thing. Keep it simple. Okay. So causality and sight. Seeing is believing, and being is ... We don't know exactly, but we have ideas. An exploration of religious ideas in contrast to story worlds. So what is choice, right? So in religion of all types, choices are the essence of the religion, because that's what you're teaching people how to make, right? And so we've had a tradition of a dialectic, free will and determinism, concepts of this in both Islam and in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So in Islam, the Mutazilites were a group of originalist Muslims from the Abbasid dynasty from the early 800s / 200s, if you're counting from the beginning of Islam. And they were pretty clever guys, and they were like, okay, God wants us to be rational and be scientific. And they believed in, they call themselves the people of monotheism and justice. So they believe that God gives everybody free will, creates no evil, and evil is all the result of bad decision making. And that following Aristotelian logic, they believed in efficient causation. In other words, it's physics, right? So they're almost like atheists plus God, in the sense that they were like completely secular rationalists, but Muslim, right? And so I'll tell you what happened to them as we get to the end of this. Well, actually, to tell the story, I'll jump to the other side. So the Athari have kind of the opposite approach. They're almost like complete determinists, which would be like linear storytelling. And these also are people who call themselves the people of the Hadith. So they are really into, so whereas the Mutazilites would follow mostly the Quran with a little bit of Hadith, and they were skeptical of the Hadiths are these additional rulings that people say, oh, the Prophet said this. And there's a lot more of them. There's like 600 pages of Quran, and there's like millions of hadiths in the 800s after the Mutazilites had their story end. We'll get to that in a minute. This guy Bukhari collected a bunch of them and ranked about 5,000 or 6,000 as being authentic. And so modern day Saudi Arabia is mostly guided by this logic. And so in their worldview, basically, if you're evil, it's because God made you that way, and it is what it is. And just, and if you're good, it's because God made you that way, and it is what it is. So then in the middle, the Hanafi madhab, which is what governs mostly Turkey and Central Asia, and gives you a little bit more wiggle room on the rules, so you don't have to be so paranoid. They're like, yeah, if you make choices, and if you have faith, then even if you get punished for your bad choices, you can be saved later on. And then the Ash'ari, which is, I suppose, the more common mainstream Sunni Islam creed nowadays, believes in occasionalism, which is a hybrid. So that's going to be the focus, because what I realized, this is why I made this whole presentation, is that occasionalism is essentially the Crossword interactive story world model. So we'll dive into that. So what happened to the Mutazilites is that in their rationalist, efficient causality worldview, they got into consequentialism. They got into thinking, okay, what if we did this? What if we did that? Instead of just thinking, oh, we'll leave it up to God, or we'll make a few choices and kind of trust the outcome. So, and they didn't respect freedom of religion or freedom of speech. So they started to persecute these guys. Hanbal is the founder of the Hanbali school of rules in Sunni Islam and the Athari Creed. And Hanbali was getting tortured, and the Caliph came in and he was like, well, are you ready to recant your position that the Quran is uncreated? So if you believe in total determinism, then whatever the text of the Quran was, it would be determined to be that way for all the time and all eternity, rather than something that God chose to do in a context, right? And Hanbal was like, never, I will never recant. The Quran is the uncreated speech of God, right? And the Caliph was like, wow, based. Okay, you know what, buddy? Come here. I'm going to get you off this rack, and we're going to go torture these other guys. Okay, so what happened was the Mutazilites got completely wiped out, pretty much. And like nobody in Islam these days calls themselves a Mutazilite. It's basically a slur. And the Quran being uncreated is now a mainstream theological position. People don't really talk about it much, but it's a mainstream position in Sunni Islam. So then, in contrast, from this period of the Islamic golden age where algebra was invented and some other things, these ideas percolated into Europe. And we have contrast in Judeo-Christianity. So in the Catholic Church, there's this similar idea of positive theology. All evil comes from bad choices. And so it's almost analogous to the Mutazilite position. And progressive Christians tend to be this way. And they're like, we can do better, guys. Let's not be mean to gay people, et cetera, right? The Catholic Orthodox is a little bit more nuanced because they got more rules. My dad's a big Catholic, and I asked him about this, and he said, God knows what choices you're going to make. So in other words, it's almost like the occasionalism model. It's almost like when you run the sim on the story world and you generate a statistical plot of all the outcomes, and based on your parameters, you see what percentage of good endings you get, what percentage of bad endings you get. In the Torah, people read the Torah and they're like, wow, God really kills a lot of people. Well, in their worldview, anytime somebody died from a heart attack or exposure or gangrene or something, that was God killing them, right? So it's a little bit more like this intermediate position. And then, of course, we have the Presbyterian Calvinist position, which is analogous to these guys, but instead of being like, well, whatever, inshallah, God, we'll see what happens. Their position was, yeah, we're predetermined to be super hardworking. And these are, in a sense, the people who built America with this Protestant work ethic. You may have heard this phrase. So an ancestor of mine, John Knox, founded the Scottish Presbyterian Church. Another ancestor of mine, he's kind of a hard-nosed guy. Another ancestor of mine, Cumberland Dugan, was a member of that church, and he helped deliver goods to the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, and he became very wealthy and mixed in with all these Freemasons that founded the United States. So hey, maybe America was God's plan all along. At least these people would see it that way. So there's quite a lot of analog in these creeds, and that's quite interesting. So what is causation? So a lot of the Mutazilite guys and later people like Thomas Aquinas and Maimonides and Ibn Arabi and Gazi that we'll get to, were all influenced by Aristotle. And these guys all lived in around the 1200s. And so Aristotle listed 4 causes, and this is very analogous to game design. I'm doing okay on time, so that's good. The material, formal, efficient, and final, right? So final would be like Final Fantasy, huh? Aerith is gonna die no matter what you do. You're gonna kill Sephiroth and save the planet, and that's the end of the game, right? So if they invested the money in Final Fantasy VII to have multiple endings, then you would have some split teleology. But they usually don't because it's expensive. So you just have one story, right? Efficient would be maybe like pure simulation. And the problem with pure simulation from a storytelling perspective is that nothing much happens in terms of interesting sequence, right? Formal is like Platonic realism, and material is incidental, and so this blends in. But like Aristotle had a place for all 4 of these things, and then there have been some different perspectives on this. So Epicurus was in notable contrast to Plato and Aristotle line, and Nietzsche is sort of his acolyte in some way. And their thing is, it's all chaos, man, and just enjoy it, and like, whatever, right? So when I was in college and I was on a lot of, had my head all mixed up, I was like, yeah, quantum physics, it's like nothing's really true, man, because the electron microscope can't probe it. So, I told this Christian girl that and like freaked her out. And then, so 20th century scientists have also recapitulated this whole debate in this context. Einstein said God does not play dice in his rebuke of quantum physics. Niels Bohr was kind of ahead. He really liked Kierkegaard, who had this similar kind of sickness unto death, theological anguish about choice and fate. And Bohr called himself an anti-realist and embraced instrumentalism. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. You guys can look that up if get some more nuance. And you got like Deepak Chopra, who's like, I saw a YouTube ad of this the other day. Every moment is a choice between love and fear. So there's like a tremendous amount of occasions to make choices in his worldview. And it's like quantum physics, so spirituality, and it's like whatever. Okay. So he's like very popular for this. And then on the far extreme, Everett had the many worlds theory, which is that quantum physics is splitting reality into parallel universes all the time, and there's like a literally infinite amount of parallel universes. And the show on Rick and Morty exemplifies this, where they'll just generate these infinite different parallel universes at will, and it's very existentially despairing. And in a way, it's like you go full circle because you go into like complete radical choice where it's like an infinitude of infinitesimal choice all the time, and that anybody who's living in a particular parallel world is essentially consigned to the fate of being in that one plot in the graph, right? So something in the middle maybe is better for human freedom. So let's pivot a little bit. Okay, so while people have been free will determinism, there's been this other current in religious history about are images okay? Is art okay? And so we have I'm about to run out of battery. Hold on a second. One second, I gotta Right back. Okay, plugged in my phone, not going to run out of juice. So they say that in Isaiah, God's talking about how these Persians are going to help out, or did help out Israel, and that God actually inspired this prophet Zarathustra to turn a kind of glom of Babylonian mythology into something that's vaguely monotheistic. So you've got Ahura Mazda, who's basically the one above, and then you've got all these other characters, right? And here's a comic book style rendition of them, and they're very iconic, and they have different color schemes and different personalities. Ahriman's of death, and then here's this guy's like representing like probably war, and she's probably like for the harvest, and so this was the dominant religion for like basically like 1,500 years or something in the majority of the world's population, other than what you would call proto-Hinduism over in India. And then here we have some idols. This is of the deity of the Edomites. Edom was in the lower modern-day Israel territory north of the Red Sea. And this guy looks a little bit, he's got the horns, he's kind of like a little bit like the devil or something. And then this was an idol of El Elyon, the Most High. So El Elyon in the ancient Canaanite religion was similar to Ahura Mazda in the Zoroastrian religion as the over deity. So it's kind of like a background monotheity, but then here's all these characters, right? So people really enjoy the storytelling aspect of all of these relatable visual personae, and that this is like a tendency that humanity has. And like the second commandment is like maybe like don't do that. Right. So we'll get more into that in a hot sec. So this evolved into this stark contrast between Christianity's idea of God and Islam. Christianity's like, okay, God loves you, so how does God love eternally? Well, he needed to have this counterpart of the sun, and then the love between them. It's kind of like you have a proton and electron, and the photon is the force transmission vehicle between them and creates a field, right? So God is this field, and that's the Trinity. And here we drew a picture of it, and you can worship this. It's really cool. And then Islam is like, no, don't do that. Here's some calligraphy of our word for Allah, the God. And because mathematics evolved out of this, you can see that this is actually, there's a mathematical notation that evolved later on to this. So this Aleph here is actually in calculus an integral, and this W here in the mathematics of Cantor, who dealt with all the types of infinities and countably infinite and uncountably infinite sets. Omega is used to go beyond Aleph 1 through infinity. So each Aleph is like a more mind-blowing set of infinite sets. And then the W is like the set of all of those. And so here's 1 divided by omega. And then here's the big omega. So it's an integral that counts between the infinitesimal of all the infinities and the macrotesimal of all infinities, right? So there's a lot more ideation. There's ideation in this. There's characters in this. There's a relationship. There's a drama. This drama of Jesus, and he has to die for you, And then this is like I think more mind blowing. And there's an aesthetic of a storytelling consciousness versus mathematic consciousness that these both allude to. So this is one of my favorite books, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and Eternal Golden Braid. And of course, I had to be reminded of Baudrillard's simulation versus simulacrum in this contrast of free will and determinism, iconism and anti-iconism, and what you might call Crawfordianism and simulationism. So obviously he's writing about simulation. And that you go through these stages of a faithful image copy, and then there's a perversion of that. It's like a game of telephone, and it like keeps degrading until it just becomes hyper real, right? So hyper realism is the aesthetic that has dominated the game industry, and that this is what you might call a halal image if you're like reading the second commandment super strictly, or if you're following the hadiths that ban all images, which are considered generally weak hadiths. So most Jews, and obviously very few Christians, and most Muslims have just kind of like been like, well, you can make certain amounts of art, but even if you're following the strictest interpretation, this is not a likeness of anything on the earth. This is purely conceptual. It's this carving, not of any entity or life form, but it's just some letters. It's all symbolic, and then the light shining through it creates these shadows of the letters. So it's actually a very nice illustration of Baudrillard's ideas. And if you haven't read this book, I really recommend you give it a dig through. It's very cool. So it's talking about the relationship between Gödel, the mathematician, Escher, the artist, and Bach, the musician. Gödel proved that any finite system of axioms, which is any math system, because we're going to make an infinite, you're not going to be able to finish writing down all the axioms. You got to stop writing axioms at some point, and that will inevitably produce undecidable propositions. Escher was inspired by Islamic art to make these really wonky pictures that are kind of abstracted and have patterns devolving into other patterns. And Bach used mathematical progressive cadences, which is actually key to game design, even going to like Super Mario's level design. It's actually Bach-esque if you really deconstruct it. And that these guys are all interlinked, and an eternal golden braid between these three things is almost like a trinity, but that's not God, right? And this isn't God either. This is just a book a guy wrote. And he's also an AI guy, and that's kind of interesting because that's going on. So this makes us think about there's this other aesthetic that is deeper behind this predominant tendency in human history to just have characters and images and pretty graphics, and to be so taken in by the graphics that we like love the graphics, and it's almost like borderline worship, right? Like I got this I got this NVIDIA card in a new computer so I could play Baldur's Gate 3. And it's, of course, Dungeons and Dragons is full of idols and deities, and it's a lot of graphics let's create a whole new world and you can explore it. And I was wondering, well, if you got rid of all of that and you were still going to use the graphics card, what kind of game would that involve? It'd probably involve a lot of lighting and physics and geometries and high granularity simulation and take up that computational power that way. So that's a food for thought. So here's the kernel of useful wisdom here. We have on one hand Morte D'Arthur, and on the other hand Dwarf Fortress. And in Dwarf Fortress, the storytelling that emerges is pure simulation. So this is like the Mutazilite approach to interactive storytelling, but it is anti-iconic, because for 20 years before we got the little pixel art guys, which, there's debate about whether that's in the likeness or if it's abstract enough, but what have you, that it was all ASC2 art, right? So it was essentially a game with pure calligraphy based graphics, right? And then you get all of these stories that can be generated. You can generate new worlds and get new backstories about, so-and-so dwarf had this father whose grandfather killed a dragon, who's et cetera, right? That founded this kingdom, all these things. And they can all be a bit different every time you do it. And then this is the meme model or character model, and you can see the recent thoughts. So these are all kind of material causations, whereas these are formal causations, right? Because and this is an occasionalist framework, whereas this is all what you would call emergent from this very rich mesh. And so the problem here is it's a lot of work to make a lot of encounters that give you a highly granular interactive story world, and you got to put in that work. And here it all emerges. And okay, she was interested after watching a performance. She didn't feel anything due to inebriation. She felt bitter after getting into an argument. She felt empathy discussing acquaintances' problems. She was interested after watching a performance. She felt fondness after talking with her, So there's a certain amount of mundanity to it, because in order to create the formal arc of teleological drama and character transformation, this would have to somehow glom into a more elaborate emergent form, right? And so Tarn Adams has been spending his whole life's work trying to do that, and he's been somewhat successful at it. And it's a very interesting example for us. And you can find lots of YouTube videos on people playing Dwarf Fortress and check it out more. And so they're both anti-iconic. Like, Chris didn't want to use images at all. I'm the bad influence, was like, no, Chris, we got to use images. That's what the people want. Let's use Midjourney. And I dragged you into it, and you were like, okay, actually, this is pretty cool. And you made some images. But fundamentally, it's both of these are about text and sort of calligraphy based grid frameworks. And of course, this encounter is this is some serious drama, right? And I don't think this kind of thing happens in here. And the kind of stories that you get with Dwarf Fortress are things like, oh, they delved too deep, and then they opened a portal, and the Bane of Durin, buried them in shadow and flame, right? That's from Tolkien. So that was like a classic formal story of dwarfs going wrong that was adapted into the simulationist framework. Or it'll be things like, oh, we forgot to emboss the metal cask frames, so our barrels where we keep the ale were leaky, and then the cats came in and licked it off the floor and got drunk, and then they went around and started biting people, and then a cat-borne disease started to spread, and then all the dwarves went crazy and started killing each other. So it's kind of like what happened to the Metazolites, where they thought they had everything figured out, and they just missed on one key thing, which was respecting freedom of speech and religion. And then they did not expect the guy to flip based on the conviction of the guy being willing to submit to torture, and then wipe them all out, right? And that's kind of how Dwarf Fortress games also tend to end, right? Whereas the story of Morte D'Arthur and the key summation of which major outcome do you get, has to do, it's a very moral, I don't know about theological, it exists in the backdrop of different theologies in that cultural context, but it's a very moral game design. So these are some art styles that I've been experimenting with this. And this is what we get in the history of European art, where they were like, you know what, the second commandment is fine. Like, it just means don't worship them. So let's make all kinds of stuff. And I'm trying to see what it's like if I accept more constraints. So I generated this in Midjourney just using the arabesque keyword and the geometry keyword and forest. And I've been getting some pretty interesting results from that. So this is me defacing my art from earlier, so that I don't get attacked by them on Judgment Day, following the strictest Salafi fiqh from a weak hadith, but I'm doing it out of respect. And also, it kind of makes it more interesting because you get to focus more on the body language. And it's like, yeah, they're in limbo. Like, their faces aren't happy. Like, you get that. Like, you know what I mean? So you have to imagine a little bit more. And then I'm planning a story world about Robert St. Albans, who was a crusader who reverted to Islam and helped Saladin retake Jerusalem. And in this story world, as you progress from being a Christian crusader to a Muslim revert, the art style becomes progressively more de-erastitized until at the end of the game, the image is just gonna be this calligraphy for God as you're dying. And this is I went over this in my earlier thing of an example of a scene, and here I've defaced all the art, but you can still get a vibe on the body language. And this is really, it illustrates my spiritual journey this year, because at the beginning of the year, I was really an ape of a man, and I felt like this chimpanzee who was divorced and contemplating whether to vape or shoot black tar into his arms and then go to war. And then I went through, this sort of mixed saints trying to save people in hell type thing. And then this is actually it's very light and pure and beautiful. And then Gazi, who's kind of the Thomas Aquinas of Islam, and he kind of synthesized like traditionalist pre-Sufi ideas with Sufi ideas. And here's an arabesque, something you might see on the dome of a mosque. And then here's this sort of algorithmic sketch of Gazi here. And he had a refurbishment of occasionalism where the encounters that you experience as somebody who can make good or bad choices are themselves emergent from this deeper simulation. So it's not either or. And that this would lead us to the idea of something like a dwarf fortress type simulation or something that's much simpler that can then generate semi-dynamically these structured occasionalist Crawfordian encounters and still keep them in templates of having an overarching teleological design. So I think that that's something we can, there's actually a lot of room here, both in the art styles that are anti-iconic and in synthesizing simulationism and what you might call Crawfordianism or occasionalism. In conclusion, do good deeds and no shirk, which for us means combine Dwarf Fortress with modular Crawfordian encounters. This is actually a very big field of possibility for us. And possibly use anti-iconic modular systematic geometry to sketch iconic character portraits. Not the lazy way, just typing it into Midjourney, because we're just going to make interactive novels doing that. But the earned way, by letting people replay it and figure out what are the contours of this character's soul that constrain their choices. And that really tells you about somebody. And finally, isn't it a little bit weird how the principles of Judaism and then Islam fit in with the game design ethos taught by Chris Crawford and exemplified by Tarm Adams? I think it's a little bit of a weird coincidence, but maybe it isn't a coincidence at all. Maybe it's predetermined.
Okay.
And on the dot, I conclude my presentation.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'm going to need some time to think this over. I might rewatch this, but
Cool.
very interesting analysis. So,
Thank you.
okay, then. Well, I'll see you guys next month.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Thank you so much. Take care. all.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bless you all. Have a nice day.